So we both work at NorthPoint Digital. Just a little bit about the firm first. I won't bore you too much with that, but we're primarily based here in New York. We have about 150 developers. We're tech agnostic. I run the WordPress practice. We do a lot of other technologies too, a lot of different languages. So we have .NET folks, we have Java folks, we have PHP folks. So we're pretty widespread across the board, and we service a lot of the major media publishers and a lot of other verticals here and here. With that said, I'm Arwin, and I'm a senior project manager for NorthPoint. I pretty much run the WordPress practice at NorthPoint, as well as any of our custom PHP framework-based projects. So Zen Framework, Laravel's kind of picking up speed now, CodeIgniter, things like that. You might have heard of them. And this is me before two-factor authentication. So we're just kind of stressed here like what security means. So we'll get into that a little bit more, and I'll turn this over to my colleague now.
Hi, I'm Andy Magoon. I'm a senior developer at NorthPoint. I've been developing for most of my life, and been involved in some large-scale, high-traffic WordPress installations. And this is my daughter before two-factor authentication.
Okay, so we're talking about security. There's many aspects of site security which we won't go into. What we're going to be focusing on is your front door. So what we mean by that is where you log into your WordPress admin. So with that, there's obviously password security. So this is really a personal choice about how you want to handle that. Regardless, it's your own individual responsibility to choose a unique and complex password. In terms of requirements and strength meters, they can't really help make sure that your passwords are secure. They're kind of suggestions. You can choose not to use them. And then one tip for people that are site owners that run your own WordPress, don't advertise your password requirements. This goes for anything. It doesn't even need to be WordPress. If you have a website or web application where you're asking for a username and password, don't tell them that you're only taking alphanumerics. It kind of makes it easier for people to have you. Secondly, most passwords are insecure. And Andy will go through some of these things. But adding a 9th character, for example, to an 8-character password, which is a pretty complex password there, I wouldn't be able to remember that. It would increase the cracking time from 4 years to centuries, potentially. And then if you had a really long password, like there's no place like home, that would only take like 4 days to crack because you're dealing with dictionary words there. So with that, I'll turn this over to Andy to talk about how you protect yourself.
Yeah, so one of the great things that WordPress 3.7 added was a new strength meter. And they use a library that was actually started by the Dropbox team that takes into account a lot of new factors in how people are cracking passwords these days. I'm just going to show you. So this is actually a demo of how the library works, a live demo, and you can see doing things like some people put in their name. Like let's just say I put in Andy and then James and then 1988. You can see the crack time is still instant, right? So some people look at that and they'll say, okay, well that's a long password, right? That's 8 characters, that has numbers, that has letters in it. So if we take something that's more complex, like let's do $IOKMB and then an underscore, you can see it goes all the way up to 4 years because that's a complex password. If I add the number 2 to the end of that, it goes to centuries. So it's not how long your password is, and in some cases, just using a bunch of words, when passwords are cracked, a word is actually the same as a letter. It's like a character in a big character set. So let's go back to.
So that's just kind of proving the point that in general passwords are insecure. If you know how to write some really good ones, then depending on what your password requirements are, It could potentially be centuries, but there's other dictionaries out there that hackers use that can also make that cracking time less. So how you get around that, another way in which we'll go into more detail, is adding another factor. So what we mean by that, the best authentication would be to use 3 different factors. One factor is something you know, which is what everybody typically uses. A password is something that you know. A second thing would be something that you have. So this could be a key if you work at financial companies and things like that. You might be given an RSA token. It could be your phone. Something else that's yours, that's in your possession, it's something that you have. And then the third thing is something that you are. So if you have the new iPhone 5S, your fingerprint is an example of a factor that's using something that you are. So those are the 3 main factors, and you can use any combination of those to enable multi-factor authentication. So with that, there's some common 2-factor authentication examples. If you go to the ATM, you have something you know, which is your PIN. You have something that you have, which is your ATM card. Another example of 2-factor authentication at a grocery store, you would need your checkbook and you would need your photo ID, and those are both things that you have. So these are just a few common examples that you use in your current workplace, and what we're going to go into is basically how can you enable 2-factor authentication in WordPress. So the next slide here is about using your phone. Andy's going to go into more detail here around how you can leverage your phone and enable 2-factor authentication.
Okay, so you can actually use your phone as a cryptographic token to sign in addition to your username and your password. So what happens is there's a code that gets displayed. Some people may have this for VPN access to work, where you have like a hard token and it'll show a code that changes every 30 seconds. Well, that's the same thing you can do with your phone with an app such as Google Authenticator. And then if you lose your phone, there are backup codes that you can have. You can keep them in a safe place. It's kind of like if you lose your key to your house, you have to have a backup somewhere. If you have WordPress installed, a self-hosted WordPress install, there's a couple of plugins you can use. You can download very easily and install. 2 of them there's one called 2-factor auth, and we're going to show you how to use that. Another would be Authy, and Authy has some more features to it. It can support sending SMS to you. I don't know if some of you have enabled, like Facebook will have 2-factor authentication in the form of it can send an SMS to you if you're signing on a new device. So it's something similar to that. Just show you here. This is just okay. So I'm going to install the 2-factor plugin. And then I'm going to activate it. And now you can see here this tab is for each user. And there's a QR code. If you have an app such as Google Authenticator, you can add the entry. And so when you load up Google Authenticator, you'll hit the plus button at the bottom. And then scan barcode. And then you'll use the camera. I can't show you my phone, so I'll just do it here.
Need a steady hand for this.
No, I don't know. I have a smudge on my camera.
You do that one. You just scan the one right there. Scan behind you.
It's like not focusing.
Scan the one behind you.
All right, I got work.
Great suggestion, audience.
Okay. Sorry about that. So now I'm going to log out. And now when I sign in, you can see that it wants my one-time password, which is on the screen. And it changes, it's a rolling code that changes every 30 seconds. So you have to have your phone to sign in. And there we go. And that's what it looks like on the screen when you're reading the code.
So next, we'll do another demo too. So some of you may have blogs that are hosted on WordPress.com. NorthPoint is also a partner with WordPress VIP, and all those sites on enterprise sites are hosted on WordPress.com. Basically, for this, you would do a similar thing. WordPress.com leverages Google Authenticator as well. So you'd install that on your phone. Click on the security tab in WordPress.com account settings, and then run through the setup wizard. It's pretty straightforward. A few other tips there, and Andy touched on this a little bit before. Printing backup codes. That's detailed pretty heavily on WordPress.com. And then the second tip is generating app-specific passwords. So what I mean by that is Google Authenticator. This is an app that you would use to actually generate your second factor. But the apps that I'm talking about are if you have a WordPress app for your mobile device that you use to administer your WordPress site or create posts and content and publish them. Some of those apps don't support two-factor authentication. You can set them up to, and in using WordPress.com, you can set up app-specific passwords so that you can enable or disable a specific device. So you might have an iPad that you use to publish content to the site. You might have an iPhone that you use. It's good to set up a separate password for each of those in case, say, you lose one of them. You can just go and disable that app-specific password until you recover your device or get a new one.
Go ahead and just run that.
Yeah, so Andy's going to run through how you would do this on WordPress.com quickly. So you can see this just going through the security tab, enabling two-factor authentication if you have a WordPress.com account. So Andy had previously done this already, which is why he's doing the two-factor, but we can run through to still show you where you need to go. So here he's going through the security tab. Under here, he's going to disable.
So this is the first step.
So the very first step that you would go through, you would put in your mobile number, pick the next step, and then you pick which smartphone you need to go to get the Google Authenticator application. So Andy already has it. In this case, you go through and scan the barcode again. And then this is the part where you're going to create a backup of your code. So in the event that you, say, lose your device, Google Authenticator decides to not work anymore. That's happened in the past where keys have been reset, where Google has decided to update the app. That's a risk that you're going to run. So it's good to have backups. Advice there is, going old school, print them, put them in a safe place. You have a safe or something like that, and that way you have a place to fall back on if you lose your device. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I mean, Matt said this months ago. Obviously, if you don't know Matt's website, it's ma.tt. He talked about passwords and brute force. A few of the things that he highlighted in his short blog post is, if you, in the past, admin was a default password if you're running an old version of WordPress. It's advisable you change that. If you have an admin user called admin, remove that, make it something else that nobody can just guess. Change your passwords often. Select strong passwords with WordPress 3.7. They give you a strength meter there, which Andy demoed, that can help you develop a stronger password. They're using the same application that Andy had demoed that Dropbox had developed. And then the last thing which we went over is how to enable two-factor authentication. Doing it either self-hosted using a plugin or doing it through the security tab on WordPress.com. So that said, what does security mean to you? For me, this is what it is. This is me after two-factor authentication. So I'm much more comfortable on the ground than I am jumping out of a plane. But yeah, that's it. So thank you. I'm Arwin. Andy.
I'm Andy, thank you.
One last thing, we are hiring, so if any developers here that know WordPress or just PHP in general, come talk to us after. If you guys have any questions.
Why is the login lockdown plugin not adequate protection against hackers?
So when you say login lockdown, you mean like limit login attempts that was thrown out earlier?
Yeah, exactly.
So that will help in some cases for brute force attacks. That's really just setting a threshold for how many times somebody can try. But generally those thresholds are by IP address. So a hacker from a specific IP address can only try three times before they can be locked out. Matt actually went through this in his post back in April. So we'll share these slides later too on the Meetup site, so you guys can take a look at those links. But basically why that doesn't work so well is that there's a botnet that he talks about there back in April that actually has access to 90,000 IP addresses. So if they can try 3 times and be locked out by that, but they can just switch to another IP address and try after that, and they can do that every second. So it's not really good protection. It will block maybe simpler botnets, but there are stronger ones out there. And this is 5 to 6 months ago. So I'm sure there's better tools now for hackers to go through.
I want to add one thing to that. I'd like to add one thing to that also is if somebody knows your password, they may not have access to actually have your phone. And that's a cryptographically secure token. So it protects you in that additional way too. If somebody either gets a hold of it by looking over your shoulder or guesses it, or you give it to somebody and they tell somebody else.
And there's one other thing I didn't get a chance to put the slide in, but this is glossed over. I was here for DK's security talk a few months back too. It was a great talk. I highly recommend his book if you want to go and see other ways to secure your site. But one of the things that wasn't covered there and wasn't covered in our presentation is user management. That's the other component to that front door. Like we said, change admin because that's the default that hackers are going to go and try if you have that username. But secondary to that, people forget about user management. If you have your own sites that you're running, you may have 4 or 5 people that are helping you create blog content, you create usernames for them. Make sure, 1, that their access and roles are set up properly, and 2, if they stop working for you, you probably want to delete their account, make it inactive, change their password so they don't know what it is anymore. Something so that you're maintaining that and staying on top of that, because that's a very easy front door. It's like keeping your door open or handing your key to somebody to your house. So you want to make sure you're staying on top of user management. Other questions?
Kind of a two-parter, but would this be primarily targeted, I guess, at a hosted solution versus something you're able to control, where you actually control the web service yourself?
This goes for both. So, I mean, if you're controlling the web servers, you can have an isolated site, but generally most people are running this publicly on 480 if they're running a WordPress site, and anybody can go in and log in through that. You can use HTTPS, which will help having a security layer there. DK goes into that as one layer. He goes through a layered approach of how you secure WordPress. But in general, this is basically applies to all WordPress sites.
So if you actually have control of your own servers, I guess I have a question. Why wouldn't you set up a second authoring domain, use a plugin like the domain mapping plugin, block access on your public-facing domain to all of the WP admin directories, all directories that can hurt you, and then on your authoring domain, use something that actually at the Apache or Nginx level enforces security so that users don't even have the ability, should the vulnerability be found in WordPress, to exploit the vulnerability, like adding clients to a TLS where a user has to have a certificate on their computer to even access my authoring domain.
Yeah, you can do that if you certainly set up sites like that on the enterprise level. But most of these things are for simpler sites where people are running their own self-hosted site. You have it at Bluehost or WP Engine even. But you can do those extra authoring server layers and have that behind the firewall. A lot of times for enterprise sites even, they have a separate WordPress installation that manages just their blog content. And for and the reason why they do that is to segment it out from their main content repositories or CMSs that are just internally locked behind the firewall. And that's primarily because they have a lot of blog editors that are external to their site, and they don't necessarily want to give them or provision them with VPN access to their internal network. So they kind of have WordPress sitting out on the side. So for that, we implement other measures to enable security.
Is there any other service I can use it except the Google Authenticator? Because I can't really sleep well at night if Google makes money with my QR codes and stuff and passwords. So is there any other service?
Yeah, there are actually. That's a great question. There are, but this is actually completely disconnected. So it's not. This isn't an online thing. These codes aren't going to any Google account anywhere. That's why it's important that you record your scratch codes, because if you don't record, actually I call them panic codes in some of the apps, but if you don't record those, it is like losing a key, where if you lose the key, let's say you lose both keys to your car, what do you do then? You have to go through some extraordinary measure to get a new key. You have to prove who you are or whatnot. And in the case of WordPress.com, if you lock yourself out with two-factor authentication, you have to contact them, and they're going to want to check to see who you are. But yeah, you can use Authy. There's Duo. There's a couple of them that you can use if you prefer to use some other brand. I believe it's DUO.
I'll have to say also too that you don't necessarily need to use the QR code method on WordPress.com as well as with Authy. They also support SMS. So if you have a bank account and you do banking online, that's the common practice for two-factor authentication. I know for my Chase account, they occasionally ping you if you're using a new device to access your Chase account online. They'll want to send you an SMS. That's a form of two-factor authentication. So you can enable that for your WordPress site too, but we didn't go through that in this time.